Well, good morning, Golden Corner Church. And good morning to each of you who perhaps are visiting with us for the first time. We are absolutely thrilled to have you. This morning I want to do sermon number 8 in a sermon series that revolves around the life of a man named Joseph. When we pick up on his story this morning, he's roughly 28 years old. It's been 11 years since God revealed to Joseph that one day, son, you're going to be big stuff. You're going to rule. Maybe even be a king. Who knows? 11 years. Now, if you're not familiar with Joseph's story, you may be asking, what had Joseph been doing for those 11 years? I guess we could answer it this way. We could say that Joseph had been preparing. Nope, I'm going to say it like this. Joseph was being prepared for the throne. How so, you ask? Was he in college? Perhaps graduate school? Had he applied for and been accepted to some royalty apprenticeship program? No. God was shaping Joseph for the throne using a combination of suffering and on-the-job training. You got to be kidding me. No. At this point in Joseph's life, he's been forsaken by his family, primarily his 10 older brothers. They sold him into slavery, so he has spent a decade serving as a slave. His tenure there ended because his master's wife framed him for a crime he didn't commit. And so he's been thrown into prison for life. Yeah, he's suffering. And he's been suffering for a long time. His stay in the prison was good. I guess if you could describe any time in prison as good, his time was fairly good. He and God were close. They were real close. God was constantly doing little things for Joseph just to make life better. I guess you could say just to make a bad situation better. Just because he loved him. God made sure that Joseph was always in the good graces of the warden. The Bible says that God even enabled Joseph to succeed in everything he did. Whatever it is you do in prison, he excelled at it. Within the first year of his prison stay, the warden promoted Joseph and put him in charge of the entire prison. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story, if you've picked up on this or not, but it seems like everywhere Joseph went, if you gave him just a little bit of time, he became the man in charge. Now, during his first year in prison, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had 2 men imprisoned. One was his chief baker, and the other was his chief cupbearer. Now, the chief baker, of course, had some type of management responsibilities. He must have been over an entire staff of bakers. His specialty was probably pastries. He was probably the king's pastry chef. As I read this story last week and the week before, I couldn't help but ask myself this question: as a pastry chef, what do you have to do to be thrown into a prison? I kind of imagined him bringing Pharaoh this big slice of homemade apple pie. And maybe Pharaoh going, I have told you and told you, put more sugar in these pies, they're way too tart. Away with him. Or maybe, you call this croissant flaky, I don't. Away with him. I don't know what it was, but he was thrown into prison. And so was the chief cupbearer. Now, what was a cupbearer? A cupbearer was the guy who was in charge of the king's wine. He made sure that he had an ample supply of wine. It was the wine that the king liked. And not only did he make sure that he had the wine, he served the king the wine. But before he could serve the king the wine, he had to drink some of the wine himself. For two reasons. One, to make sure that it was something that the king would like, but also to make sure that the wine had not been poisoned. Now, as a cupbearer, what do you have to do to be thrown into prison? I wondered, now, just being from Oconee County, did he try to slip a little Mad Dog 2020 under the king's nose, and the king took one drink and said, away with him? For whatever reason, these two men end up in prison, and after they've been there for quite some time, the warden put these men under Joseph's care, and the Bible said that Joseph looked after them. And that's where we pick up on this story this morning. I want you to read 3 verses with me. Four verses. Genesis 40, beginning with verse number 5. Look at this. The Bible said, while they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed. What we're looking at here really blows my mind. He noticed that they both looked upset. He picked up on it, sensitive, discerning. He was also caring. Look what he did. He inquired, why do you look so worried today? He asked them, and they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. And then Joseph said to them, guys, interpretations belong to God, so if you would tell me your dream, perhaps God will show me what they mean. Now, here's what blows my mind. We know what Joseph's been through for 11 years. You know what? Suffering can impact us in one of two ways. It can turn us inward so that we become the focal point of our lives. And all we dwell on is our personal suffering. Or it can turn us outward. It can turn our focus onto others, and having been hurt, having been wounded, because we are in pain, we become very acutely aware and sensitive to the pain of others, to the point that we are concerned for them and we're willing to step in and get involved. Fortunately for these two men, Joseph's suffering had turned his focus outward. So the cupbearer went first. He said, I'll tell you what, let me tell you my dream. He said, in my dream there were 3 vines. I saw 3 vines. And the vines bloomed and then produced grapes. And I reached up and picked a cluster of grapes, and I squeezed them. I had the grapes in one hand, the king's cup in the other, and I squeezed those grapes and squeezed the juice down into the cup. What does that mean? Joseph said, I know exactly what it means. The 3 vines represent 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift you up out of this prison, which means they were, Adam, apparently underground in some kind of dungeon. 3 days, he's going to lift you up. And he's going to restore you to your position. Man, you're going to get your freedom back. You're going to get your job back. You're going to get your life back. And then what did Joseph say? Oh, you got to read it with me. Genesis 40, verse 14 and 15. He said, and please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place. For I was kidnapped. In other words, I'm not here by my own choosing, but against my will. I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it. In other words, what's happening to me is wrong. I've been done wrong. This is not right. I want us to stop for a moment and think about what Joseph just said. First of all, notice what he did not say. He didn't say, congratulations, friend. I'm so happy for you. And don't you be worried about me. Don't you worry about me. I'll be all right. My life is in God's hands, and if this is His will for me, I gladly accept it. Oh, no. What did he say? Dude, listen carefully to me. Things are about to go well for you. And when they do, things are going to go well for me. Because you're going to see to it. I've done you a favor and you're going to do me a favor. You're going to tell Pharaoh my story. You're going to get me out of here, and you're going to get me out of here just as quickly as you possibly can. What's Joseph thinking? He's thinking this guy is his get out of jail free card. Joseph believes that his luck has finally changed at last. Something good has happened to him. He's thinking the entire nightmarish ordeal has just about run its course. What does this tell us about Joseph? At this point in his life, 11 years in to this ordeal, Joseph has not accepted that God wanted him in Egypt or in this prison. He didn't believe it was what God wanted, and he certainly wasn't what he wanted. What did Joseph want? Joseph wanted out. Not only of prison, Joseph wanted out of this entire period of suffering. He wanted his life back. He was tired of waiting. I think tired of waiting on God, and if God wasn't going to get him out of this, surely the cupbearer would. Well, the baker, he's like, whoa, wait a minute, dude, wait a minute. Remember, I had a dream too. Let me tell you my dream. In my dream, I've got 3 baskets of baked goods on my head. The center basket contains pastries that I've made for Pharaoh. But Pharaoh is not helping himself to all these baked goods, but rather birds have perched on these baskets and they're eating everything that I've baked. What does it mean? Joseph said, the 3 baskets represent 3 days. And in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to have you lifted up out of this dungeon. And when he does, he's going to have you impaled. We have talked about impalement here before, so I'm not going to go into any great explanation as to what it is. If you're not familiar with the process of impalement, think of a human corn dog. Following? Following? Man on a stick. You with me? And so this is what he said. He is going to have you impaled, and he's going to leave you out in the elements, and the birds are going to pick the flesh off of your body. Thank you, Mr. Encouragement, Mr. Sunshine Joseph, for that good word. I believe at that point, Joseph kind of watched the clock. A day passed, 2 days passed, 3 days passed. Man, I think on that 3rd day, he's watching that dungeon door. He's expecting any minute for that door to open. And it did. Some of Pharaoh's guard came down the ladder. They had some official-looking documents. They took them to the warden, who politely released the cupbearer and the baker. You know what's happening? Everything's going down exactly as Joseph said it would. How do you think it made him feel? I think that hope has been rekindled. He's got every reason to believe he's on his way out the door. I believe he's feeling relieved. Whoo, just about over. I think he's feeling grateful. I don't know how long he waited maybe a day, maybe two. I can just in my mind see him going up to the warden and going, hey, our buddies, the baker, the cupbearer, you heard anything? The warden said, yeah. Things worked out great for the cupbearer. He's been restored to his position back at home with the family. I can see Joseph leaning in the warden and asking, what about that baker? Ooh, things didn't bode so well for him. He's hanging on a stick on the south end of town. You know what Joseph realized? Whoa, things have unfolded exactly as I was shown. What do you think he would do at that point? You know what I think he did? I think, in my mind, I picture him sitting, asking the warden, can you sit down a minute? Can we talk just a minute? Imagine him, saying, I got to tell you what happened. They had dreams. I interpreted the dreams, and it's just a matter of time. And the cupbearer, he's going to talk to Pharaoh. I just need to give you a heads up. I won't be here much longer. I want to thank you for how kind you've been to me, but you're going to need to replace me. And so I just wanted to let you know, just as a courtesy, I picture him, going back to his room, putting together his handful of personal effects. Why? Sarah, he's getting ready to leave. This is a done deal. This is a lock. I imagine him going from sale to sale, kind of doing his farewell tour. Guys, it's been good. Hope I've been a blessing to you. Hope things fare well for you. I'll be leaving soon. Meanwhile, what's going on above ground? Read Genesis 40, verse 23. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Can he not catch a break? He's been forsaken. He's been framed. Now he's been forgotten. I wonder how many days it took him to figure out this was not going to work. Scott, I can just picture him. He's got a calendar and he's got a marker. He marks off day 1, day 2, day 3. I believe he consoled himself by reasoning, well, he was out of work for a long time, away from the family for a long time. I know he's got a lot to catch up with in both places. And there's probably got to be some kind of legal documentation to get me out of here. And so I know how slow the government can be at processing paperwork. So, it's going to take a while. He just keeps Xing off these days and Xing until one day he quits Xing because he realized something. It ain't happening. What a major disappointment that must have been. Read the first portion of Genesis 41:1 with me. 2 full years later. I gotta be honest with you. I can read that and begin to weep. 2 full years later. Here's a man that knew it's about over. It wasn't nearly over. Had to be crushing. But 2 full years later, something wonderful happened. Joseph at first wasn't even aware of it. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had 2 dreams, and these dreams disturbed him. So John Boy called in all of his advisors, astrologers, wise men. He told them the 2 dreams. He said, guys, interpret these for me. And nobody could. Standing there, listening to all this, was the cupbearer. I'm sure he was serving all these guys a vintage wine, as they talked and discussed and mused over the possible meanings. And as the cupbearer is standing there, something supernatural happened. I want us to read about it in Genesis 41:9. I want you to see that first word because it is huge, finally. Finally. That is such a significant word because you know what it alerts us to? This entire brutal period of Joseph's life is about to come to a sudden, abrupt, wonderful end. Finally, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. He said, "Today I have been reminded." He didn't say, "I remember." What did he say? "I've been reminded." I think that something supernatural happened there, Donnie. I think God reminded him. He said, "Today I've been reminded of my failure," he told Pharaoh. And then he proceeded to tell Pharaoh everything about Joseph and what had happened. And it led to Joseph's release. Joseph was right about why he met the cupbearer. He's going to be instrumental in getting me out of here. Joseph was right about how this was going to happen. The cupbearer is going to mention me to Pharaoh. Joseph was wrong about when this was going to happen. He thought it was when they met. The date of his release was actually 2 years later. Now, I've told you that because there is a great, great, great lesson. I can't see what time. Man, it's only 10:11. You know, we can take 5 minutes and socialize here, and I've still got time to finish this. There's a lesson here about God, about your God. You got to know. You guys, Ronnie, what is it? You can't rush God. You with me? Everybody with me? You can't rush God. God had a plan for Joseph's life. He's going to be a great ruler. God had a purpose for Joseph's life. He was going to save thousands of people, entire countries from starvation. Therefore, God placed Joseph in a process that would shape him for success. Psalm 105 tells us that in order to make Joseph successful, God tested or improved Joseph's character. How did he do that? God used suffering to break Joseph down. Then God rebuilt Joseph into the kind of person he could use greatly. This process took time. How much time? The preparation process took much more time than Joseph anticipated or desired. And in this story, Joseph learned a hard lesson the hard way. He learned that you can't rush God. Joseph had obviously grown tired of waiting. After all, it had been 11 years, so Joseph decided it's time to make something happen. He tried to accelerate the process, and how did that work for him? It led to a major disappointment and only made his bad situation much worse. I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, Ronnie. Wait a minute. Don't you think God arranged this meeting between Joseph and the cupbearer? I know he did. Well then, Ronnie, under these circumstances, what was Joseph supposed to do? That's a great question. And I'm going to show you exactly what he was supposed to do next week. You with me? Huh? But until then, here's what you need to understand. God did arrange the meeting between Joseph and Pharaoh's cupbearer, and the cupbearer was divinely placed in Joseph's life in order to help Joseph's dreams come true. But not now. Not when they first met. God set all this up so that Joseph could be released and promoted at a later date, 2 full years later. According to God's schedule, it wasn't time for Joseph to be released. It was time for Joseph to wait. Joseph was on God's schedule, and try as he might, he was not going to rush God. You hanging with me? I guess you are. Good, because we've just gotten to the painful part. You ready? How does this relate to you? I don't think I really need to explain it, because I know what's rolling around in your mind right now. There's some questions. You're thinking to yourself, Ronnie, okay, God has a plan and a purpose for my life too, right? Yep. And Ronnie, God's probably going to put me in a preparation process kind of like the one Joseph was in, right? Count on it. And this process is probably going to be difficult, right? More than you can imagine. And running this process is going to take lots and lots of time, right? Once again, you're on the money. And Ronnie, I'm probably going to grow tired of waiting, aren't I? And eventually try to take my situation in my own hands and make something happen. Right? If you're as human as the rest of us, and I'm guessing you are, that's exactly what you're going to do. And when you do, you'll learn what Joseph learned. You can't rush God. God operates on His own time schedule, not ours. There will be times in your life where God requires you to wait. God may make you wait on an answer to prayer. Man, I got things I've been praying for 25 years. 25 years. God may make you a promise and then make you wait on the fulfillment of that promise. God may wait on meeting a legitimate need that you have in your life. You can be sure of this. Following God requires waiting on God. Now listen to me, man, that's worth the price of admission. You need to make a note of that. Following God will require waiting on God. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. Nobody likes to wait. Nobody. Why not, Ronnie? Well, let me quote a mentor who has had a profound impact on my life. Tom Petty says it best. The waiting is the hardest part, huh? Some of you classic rockers got that. Some of you are going, I'm not sure. Did that guy write a book? Is he a theologian? Waiting is hard on us humans. However, as hard as it is, there will be times in our lives when God makes us wait. Ronnie, why is that? Why does God make us wait on Him? Once again, that's a great question. And once again, I'm going to answer that question next week. But until then, here's what you got to know. God will schedule seasons of waiting in your life. And when He does, there's nothing you can do to rush Him. So in light of that lesson, what should we do? Here's what I'm suggesting. How profound is this? Wait on God. I like this episode in Joseph's story because it reveals something to me that I needed to see. Joseph is only human. I got to admit that up to this point, I've looked at Joseph as different from the rest of us, almost superhuman. The guy just goes with the flow. Whatever it is, just goes with it. He never complains, never cusses, never takes a swing at anybody. Never tries to settle the score, get even. No matter how far down he is knocked, he just rises back to the top. But then we come to this story, and we see the chink in his armor. Like the rest of us, he doesn't like waiting. Joseph grew impatient and tried to make something happen. Hallelujah, the man is a human. By nature, all of us humans are typically impatient. You go, maybe you are, Ronnie, but not me. Well, let me ask you a question. How do you respond when you're going down I-85 at 80 miles an hour, 3 minutes behind schedule, and all of a sudden you're caught in a traffic jam and you're not moving an inch? How do you respond to that? Do I need to ask your wives? Do you do a little sing-along? Hey, let's just have some fun. We're caught here, everybody together. Row, row, row. Is that the way you respond? How do you respond when the person in front of you keeps sitting at the traffic light, even though it's turned green because they got to finish the text? Huh? God's watching you. Huh? How do you respond when the person in front of you at the checkout line strikes up a seemingly never-ending personal conversation with the cashier? It's 15 minutes before the game. You ran in to get the chips and the salsa. The person in front of you has already paid. They look at the cashier and go, "Now, your name's Brown?" "Yes, it is, sir." "Who's your daddy?" "Fred Brown." "Fred Brown! I went to school with Fred Brown. I got to tell you a story." "Hang on just a minute, fella. I got to tell you a story." How do you respond to that? How do you respond when you're sitting at the restaurant and the folks that came in after you are being served their food before you? You don't have to answer those questions because I already know. I know that you're human and humans have a problem with waiting. Therefore, you're going to have to prepare yourself. I know that God has scheduled periods of waiting in your life. Some of you are smack dab in the middle of one of those right now. I know He's going to require you to wait longer than you wanted and longer than you ever imagined, and I know what you're going to be tempted to do. You're going to be tempted to take matters in your own hands and make something happen. I want you to listen carefully to me. I'm going to give you some great advice. Don't do that. Don't you do that. You say, "Ronnie." Why, Ronnie? I'm going to give you 2 reasons. First, it'll make matters worse. It'll make matters worse. It does every time. Trying to rush God set Joseph up for a major disappointment, only making his bad situation worse. Taking matters in your own hands may feel like the right thing to do at the moment, but it always leads to failure, frustration, and exhaustion. You know why? You can't rush God. You can't, I can't, none of us can. Nobody can. Don't try that. God operates on His own schedule. Trying to make things happen rather than waiting on God will create complicated and sometimes lasting problems. I'm talking about problems that could go on for generations after you're long gone. You don't believe me? Why don't you pull out the book of Genesis this afternoon and read the story of Abraham and Sarah? You'll see what I'm talking about. So rather than making your situation worse, wait on God. But there's a second reason to wait on God. I want you to listen to me. It'll be worth the wait. Don't believe me? You wait till you see what God does for Joseph. It's going to blow your mind. I promise you, Joseph thought to himself, "Wow, this was worth the wait." And I promise you that if you will wait on God, it'll be worth your wait. There's an old saying that goes like this: all things come to those who wait. I can't promise you that if you wait on God, all things are coming your way. But I can promise you that God's best is coming your way. So wait on God. Let me see what I got to work with. Oh, my goodness. I got 6 minutes. If I let you go now, you wouldn't know what to do with those 6 minutes. You're like, I didn't plan for this. I've been in a season of anniversaries. October 30th was my wedding anniversary. But there's some anniversaries that I've celebrated in the month of November, that commemorate the end of some long periods of waiting. On the very first day of January 1980, God called me to be a preacher. Now, Kevin, I'm not naive. I didn't expect to get a call from Atlanta First Baptist the next day going, we need somebody to replace Dr. Stanley. We understand that you're now entering the ministry. We'd really have you. I knew that wasn't going to happen. But I kind of figured, give me a couple of years to get this figured out. I'll be good to go. Lacked 1 week of 8 years that I waited. 1 week, short of 8 years. On November the 8th, 1987, a little church in Salem voted me in as their pastor. Told me, turn in your notice tomorrow. We're going to let you preach the gospel and make a living at it. I got to tell you, man, it was a dream. I had envisioned that day and that moment thousands of times. It happened. Were there times that I thought, it's never, times I thought it was never, but it happened. So I become a pastor, and I'm studying the Bible, and in this new role as a spiritual leader in a church, God began to kind of show me in my mind kind of how He wanted the church of the latter 20th century and 21st century to what it was supposed to look like, how it was supposed to operate, and I began to try to transition that church, and it was so difficult, and it was elusive, Mike. It was like, can I quote Tom Petty again? You heard the song Running Down a Dream? Anybody heard that? It's kind of the way ministry was for me. I'm running, I'm chasing this elusive, slippery dream that one day I'll be able to pastor this church that I see in my mind. And I devoted the next 25 years of my life to that dream. I don't know exactly when it happened. I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. I wasn't making notes. I can tell you this, I'm pastoring that church today. The church that I saw in my mind, I see with my eyes. The church I long to be a part of, I'm a part of. The ministry I always dreamed of is the ministry I have. And I'll tell you what I told God a week ago Friday, standing right here. It was worth the wait. I have no idea what God is making you wait on, but I'm encouraging you strongly, wait on Him. What if it takes another year? Wait on Him. Ronnie, it's looking impossible. I know, but it might be impossible for you. But it is very possible for Him. Wait on Him. And I promise you this, when He comes through, when He delivers, it will be well worth the wait. You know what I thought before I got here today? I think this message is going to preach. Man, it preached better than I imagined. Wait on the Lord. Let's pray together. God, I don't know what to say. are so wise and so faithful and so capable and so good. Lord, you are right even when we think you're wrong. Lord, you're on time even when we think you're late. Help us to trust you enough that we would wait on you. God, I've got friends here this morning. They're kind of like Joseph. It's been a long, grueling wait. Give them the grace they need to wait a little longer if that's what's necessary. Or, Lord, perhaps sometime soon, you will suddenly, abruptly deliver them from the season of their life that they're in right now and take them into a blessed, a season of their lives where they recognize how blessed they are. They feel it, they see it, they're experiencing it. I guess a fitting way to wrap up this prayer would be to simply say this: your will be done. In Jesus' name, amen. I love you. Have a great week.